Let's start the third episode where we are going to bring the data which is needed to actually search on the cities and then post that the airports related to that. So for that, we already know that I already have um, this airports.json server side code, or at least a server side JSON file which is available, on which we will be making the query. For that, I'll be using Alamofire to fetch that. Alamofire client will be the one who will make that HTTP service call. So let's bring in Alamofire. To add that, let me go to my pod and then maybe grab whatever I already have in my project, in the working project. Alamofire version 5 is what I'm going to use. And install that. Okay, that's done. So Alamofire is implemented. Now maybe compile it once. So that's available now. So let's start bringing in the server-side code. For that, let me define something called as a group called service. And within that, I'm going to keep a folder called HTTP. Because we will also will be bringing some other services like location services and all, where I will be needing a separate group for that. So first thing first, HTTP service, and a similar approach like all the earlier application development which I had done. The same thing I'm even going to use here, where I'm going to use the router pattern for the services. So let me, because I already have it available, the HTTP router and HTTP service, I'm just gonna directly bring that to this project. So maybe I can create that HTTP router. So if you are using some framework like Alamofire along with Moya, framework like Moya, it is already implementing this kind of a routing pattern there. So if you don't have it, then you can even easily make it using enums HTTP router. So that will basically have a protocol. Maybe I can just show you how to work with that HTTP router. Import Alamofire, and then it should have a base URL string. So this is more like a builder approach, where each and every component gets built based on whatever input that you are giving to this protocol. And you need to have path string, base URL, then path, then method, which can be get, post, put, anything, delete, patch, HTTP method. Then you can have the headers required, HTTP headers, which is more like all those headers you might give, like content type. At least in our case, it's only going to be content type application JSON. So most of these parameters and things which we need are not much in use, at least in this tutorial. But if you want to have an understanding of how to create this routing pattern, then it's easier if we can just follow this. The parameters required, if you need to pass some parameters. Then body, even this one will not have anything to do even in this project which we are creating, because body is nothing that we need to bother about. So this body is a function. And then finally a function to create the request using all of these things which we have implemented using HTTP service. So we will also be creating something called as an HTTP service, a protocol that we will pass. So that we need to create that right now because we don't have it yet. So let's create that HTTP service. Again, Alamofire. Protocol HTTP service, where it needs to have a session manager. Get and set, and then a function request which will accept the URL request. Request convertible data request. That's done. So that's my HTTP service base protocol, which will be implemented by our specific implementations. So this is my HTTP service. This HTTP router will actually accept HTTP service to make that final request to get that data. So we have now the HTTP router and HTTP request. Now let's make those specific classes for making that call to fetch all the airports. So we need an airport HTTP service class. Okay, this if it is a class airport HTTP service. Which needs to again implement those things which we have. Session manager, we can use the Alamofire's default session manager. Return session manager dot request. So we'll use that session manager request, pass the URL request, and you can even validate what all responses it needs to handle. So validate all the status codes. So it can be between 200 and less than 400. So all these it can validate. So that's my HTTP service. Now let's create HTTP router side for the airport. Airport HTTP router. It'll require Alamofire, and that is going to be an enum airport HTTP router. So this is that enum pattern. If we had multiple paths to handle, then this would have made more sense, but then I'm just using the same structure for every project, so that in case if I need to actually scale this project later, then it makes sense that I have it in this structure. Otherwise you can just create a normal Alamofire request and even not do all these things. It's up to you, but the basic things you can even do in a way you require it. Base URL string. So this is going to implement all those things needed. You can just add all the steps needed: path, method, headers, base URL, all those things. Let that base URL come at the top. So I'm gonna return base URL here. Let's go to this Postman grab that part. Until here, I'm just going to use this as the path for airports. So this is my base URL. Included that. Then the path is going to be, if we had multiple, we just are going to have one. Then that's going to be this get airports. And for that, the path is going to be airports.json. The same thing whatever you are seeing in Postman. This airport.json is what I'm going to use as the path. That's done. Let's return that path. Now let's define the method. Switch self case get airports return. It's going to be a get request, keeping it as get itself. That's done. Parameters, headers, all those things are going to remain as parameters. What is it going to be? Headers, can keep it as nil because I don't need any headers. Nil. Parameters nil. Body again nil, nothing there. So basically this is a very basic kind of a request. It does not need anything at all. And final thing, you don't need this request part. It's again a function that's going to come somewhere else. HTTP router, let's go back to our HTTP router. So something we need to extend on the HTTP router side, which we need to do, which I missed out. HTTP router, some of the things which are which I can keep as parameters. So this one, if there is no parameter needed, I can just return right away as nil. So we don't need to actually do that at the airport HTTP router side. Even the body part, if you don't need any body, you can directly return nil here. Return nil. So these are the defaults. And we can also define a function here called as URL request. So this is going to be the input for the request, this one. So let's see that in a bit, because this URL request is what it will generate and pass to the service, HTTP service. So we are actually creating that here itself. So we are creating a URL request, and that URL request will be built like using all of these things. So let me just show you that. URL request is the output, and for that we need first thing the base URL. Base URL string is converted into a URL, and then append the path component. So that creates you the URL with the path, and then use that to create a request object. So that's the way we are this is how you are going to use this HTTP router. Whatever you are entering here is finally going to get converted into a URL request. So it should accept this URL and method with the headers. let's use this URL, pass that. You already know the method. Headers, whatever we are passing is passed here. That creates you the request, and then also set the HTTP body of the request. Headers, what's the header type? URL request. It's of type header itself, HTTP header. That's a problem. It should be headers instead of header. URL method headers, this should be fine. Yeah, now the HTTP body, you know, the body, call that function body, and then finally return the request. So we are converting all the parameters which we accepted here. Call can throw, so try. That's it. So URL request is created using the base URL, appending the path. Then use URL request is created using the method URL and the headers which we pass. And finally, you create that request HTTP body, return that HTTP. So where are we going to use this? We're going to use it in the request function. Go there, request. That's going to throw. So here we need some more stuff. Throws data request. So that's the response type. Data request will be created using the if you're passing an HTTP service. So we can have the default implementation here itself. Return try service. So that is the service that we are passing. So HTTP router request function is going to accept a service which is going to implement HTTP service. In our case, it is the airport HTTP service. So that is a service which we might pass, and then use that request to pass that URL request, right? So we already know, we already created it as URL request. So that's how you create a request in this request function accepting service.request. So we have so many things default, like parameters, body, and everything being set as defaults here. Headers, even headers, even that can be set as empty here, but let's do it. So still it is asking me to implement. So I can get rid of parameters, body, and everything, because those are not required things. And then finally headers, we already have the headers here because it was header, so that's the reason it's giving an error now. So I can just get rid of this. Even we don't need headers, so maybe I can go back and make this as optional. Return nil here, even here return nil, so that it does not need it. So only if when you need it you can bring that. So whatever we have now is base URL, path, and the method type, which is get. So these three things to create this HTTP router. So we are ready with HTTP service as well as router. Now it needs to be consumed. So HTTP things are ready here. I'm going to create a service which is the consumer of these two things. I mean, at least the HTTP router, HTTP service maybe. Yeah. So I'm going to call it as airport service. So idea behind having a service separated from an HTTP service is that, let's say, if you don't have an Alamofire based HTTP service, or if you have NS URL session or something, then it should be easily replaceable at a point. So that's the reason I'm creating a separate service which will then consume your HTTP service, whatever be the type, because this is again going to conform to a protocol. Let me create that protocol. Airport API, let me call it as Airport API. So that's my protocol, which is going to have one function. Just one function is enough for us because we are just gonna fetch one airports. So let me call that as fetch airports, asking no parameters because we don't need any parameter, and it is going to return some type. So this is going to be an asynchronous process. Normally, if you wanted to return it, you might just create something like a closure, maybe completion. I'm just giving you a sample of what can happen in a non-Rx scenario. Then this is going to be something like airport response is going to come back. So this is the normal way you might do it. Because we are going to do Rx way, I might not use this closures, but if you're using closures, this is the way you do it. Have maybe a completion block, then handle those responses. So I guess that's pretty okay. But if you are using an Rx way of doing it, then I need to do something here. I'm gonna use import RxSwift. Let me keep it as void for this time's sake, because we need to handle the response type. Like when the response comes back, we need to parse it and deserialize it and use it. So for that, let me understand what is the response type is going to be like. So for that, I'm gonna show you how you can do that. So I'm gonna use something a utility or an application called QuickType.io, where it's very easy to do that. So I have pasted everything, the response that I received as an airport response here, and it creates me a response here with all the parameters which needs to be created. Like it's going to be airport response element, codable type. So it just translates my response to the codable version. So airport response type alias is what it's going to give me an array of things which has each and every attribute it needs to pass is identified here. So that's what I have used in this project, QuickType.io's app, to convert that. So let me just show you how it is going to look like. So I'm just gonna directly import that to my project. For that, let me create a group for model, and then let me call that as airport model. And I'm going to grab that whole thing. So that's the response which gets created. And I'm gonna keep their copyright. Just like that. That's the decoder. How do you need to serialize it is also presented here. Say that is my response. This is my codable type. It is going to be an array of airport response, and each airport model is going to look something like this: code, latitude, longitude, name, city, country, ID, lots of things, but we might be only interested in some of its things. So I'm just using that. Also, I have created equatable, hashable and everything so that I can use it within a set. So equatable, hashable mainly to identify that when I don't have duplicates in the array, so I'm differentiating each and every airport based on the code of it. So that's why there is an equatable implementation along with hashable, hasher.combine based on the code. This is a basic hashable equatable implementation, just to make sure that the array that you are receiving, when I pass it, I don't have any duplicates in it based on the code. So that's my airport response. Now I know how am I going to parse it back. So that is my airport response. Let me go back to this place. So this being a request and response, and I'm only expecting a single result. I'll only be making one request and I'll just receive one response, which will have 70,000 plus records coming back. So I'm just gonna create a single, which is nothing but RxSwift's version of an observable. It's a trait where an observable, once it only sends one result, and after sending that one result, it completes the sequence. It does not send any more results, and if there is an error, it ends it right there itself. So that's the reason I'm going to use a single, and the response is going to be airport response. So this type is my response. It's an array, comes back as data, and that is what I'm going to parse. So airport response is what I'm going to receive. So let's continue. That's my airport response. And let's go back to the service. So that's my fetch airports API. Now this has to be implemented in my airport service. So let's create this an extension. Let's create an extension, airport service, and it will ask me to implement that function. That's ready. Also, let's create it as a shared instance, singleton. And also this will, for executing things, import. Let me also import RxSwift, because it's giving an error for this single. It's going to return a single. Also, so let's create that structure here. Return single dot create. That's how you create a single. And then return disposables dot create. That's enough for the error to move out, but we have not yet used this. So we'll be making a request and using this single to respond back those results. So let's do that. First thing first, I need to have now the service available to make that request. So I'm gonna pass HTTP service, which is whatever we had defined as airport HTTP service. So let's create that instance here, private instance. This is going to be the one which is going to make that request to get all the airports. So I have this service. Let me now make this first call within this single dot create dot get. Okay, this is not this. We are not going to make the call using the service. We have created the router pattern, airport HTTP router dot what is that? We named it as, let's just go back, HTTP airport HTTP router, that's the name, dot get airports. get airports. That's the path endpoint, and you make a request using an HTTP service. So we already have the HTTP service, and now this is going to give me a response back. Response is going to come back as JSON. So I'm going to get the JSON back. I'm going to call it as result. And then completion handler. What does it say? I don't need this. Okay, let's just keep this as result, and this is where we are going to get that result back. So this is going to gives you a call can throw, but it's marked as try, so we can keep it as try, and then keep it within a do catch. Keep it inside do catch. That's done. Now next thing is HTTP service needs to be it needs to be passed. Captured. Okay, that's done. Everything is successful. So let's see whether this result is coming back. Maybe I can just parse it and see, because we might just get this result here, and then we need to actually get that. So let's see. Maybe I'll try decoding it here. So I have this result, so I need to get that data. Let's tell that data is equal to result dot data, which is optional type, and let me now use that. Else maybe I'll just keep it. I'll just return, not doing anything. Ideally I should throw an error, so I'll do that later. Let's see whether we get a result right now. So I'm just gonna use JSON decoder dot decode by the protocol. I know what it is. Airports response dot self, and pass the data. Simply do that. Again, call to this has to be in a do catch block again. Do try catch block. Let's do the error handling later. Let's just see whether we get the response back or not. So this is going to return me all the airports. Let's print that. It's gonna bring back so many records right now. So this part is ready. Fetch airports. So we just need to test it once before sending any response callback. We'll just see whether it comes here and then we get that result back or not. Until then, let's keep working on this. So my fetch airports request is ready. Response passing to an extent is done. We need to send it back. Anyway, we can even send it back. There's no harm in that because we already have the single success. It's anywhere is expecting an airports result here. Response. That's done. Remember, single event produce a result of type element, but context expect. Okay, so maybe airport response. Okay, this data type is wrong. It should be, what's the airports type? Okay, type alias airports response. I don't need these two because this was grabbed from the earlier project where I had this airports response codable. I also have the airports response, which is again an array. Let me get rid of this and see. This is my airports response. Airports response. Now it should be fine. Okay, also on the side. Cool, that is also taken care. Let me just validate it once. Fine, that's fine. So that was something I had earlier created where I had two struct. One was a struct and then another was a type alias. So type alias is what finally I had worked on. So that I'm just keeping it back. It's going to be that type alias, which is going to be the result. So our fetch airports service is ready. Now all that we need to do is somehow bring it to the view model to fetch it. For that, how do we do that? We already have the view model for search city view model. You go there and somehow we need to pass that service here. So let's do that. So let's pass the service. Just gonna call it as airport service. We already have the airport API to be passed. So I'm passing that airport API. Also keep an instance of that here. Airport service self.airport service airport service. So we brought the airport service here. Now it's going to ask me to include it here. So we already have the instantiation happening here. So right here we can just call the service equal to airport HTTP airport service dot shared instance. Pass that. Done. So now it should not give me an error. So we managed to pass the airport API to this view model. So now we need to, whenever the app is launching, we need to make sure that this service gets called and it loads that view model. So let's do that. So where should it happen? So the best place for it to happen is during this init, because we are doing this init when view did load is happening, like somewhere here. Search city view model init is happening right here. So around this place is where we can init it. So for that we can even pass it when the init is happening. So let's create a function. I'll just call it as process, where it will accept nothing maybe, because it's an instance function, and then I can call it as soon as the init is happening, process function. And then I already have the service with me, self.service airport service. I'm gonna call fetch airports. So this being a function which returns a single, for it to execute we need to subscribe to it. So for that, let's subscribe and need to dispose it once this this gets de-initted. So for that, when search view model gets de-initted, we need to dispose it. So dispose back. We don't have an import of RxSwift. Import RxSwift. That's done. Go back, and then we need to instantiate the dispose back. Dispose back is nothing but something which can take care of disposing all the RxSwift observables whenever the consumer class or struct gets deinitialized. That's what is happening here. So I'm just fetching, I'm not even mapping and getting these values at this point. I just want to see, maybe we can even do that, because we already actually sending it through that signal of airport. So we should ideally be receiving the airport's result right here. So whatever I can do is go back there and remove that print, which I had at the airport service side. This print maybe we can bring there, because we know that it is sending this signal, but we still need to do some stuff here. We'll come back once the value is received here. So airports should be received here once this initial fetch call is happening. So we are pretty much ready to execute and see whether this airport results is coming back or not. Let's do that. Run the app. Loading. It should make that fetch call now. Nothing went through. So nothing happened. Let's see. Did we make a call? Fetch airports. Did this request go through? Let's see. Yeah, it did go through. And there is data. And then it's supposed to get this parsed, and it failed because of some reason. That's a small error I made here. It should be airports.json. So let's try now. So seems to take a while to get that return. Now it's okay. Looks like I have some records, 3885 values coming back. So that's the number of airports result which is returned. Now that should be fine. It's printing it fine. All the records are coming back. So airport models loading is working fine here. All that we need to do is to keep it here within this view model, and then use it for the search feature. So before concluding this episode, let me just do some error handling right here. So error handling, the airport fetch failed right here. So we know that something failed. So if there are some failures, we need to handle it properly. Let's make those things, let that error handling happen as well as parsing happen in a better way, and then we will conclude this episode. So whatever I'm going to do is whatever process which we did here, this part of it, maybe I can move it to a parser. So first thing, let me create an extension of airport service, and then let's bring this part within that airport service. I'm gonna create a function called parse airports, and it's going to return me the airport's response. So what is the type of the request is going to be? We call that, I'm just going to pass that result is it itself, and that is of type AF data response any. So that's what Alamofire returns as a response. Once you have that, so maybe import Alamofire there. That's done. So once you have received that here, I can just pass that to Alamofire. So whatever is going to happen is, let me just pass this same thing whatever we had here. Let airports is now going to come through the parser. I'm just gonna call airport service, let this be a static function, and parse airports. pass the result. So this is going to parse and give me the airport's result back. Now this is going to give me an error. Same issue, I missed that R even earlier. So I don't need this data being handled here. Instead, let that be done by the parser itself. Move that to the parser, first step. Result.data is handled here. And next is, maybe I can get that result right here. Let airport's response be trying JSON decoder dot decode using the airport response dot self and pass the data. This is returning me the airport response. So if there is some error, then let's keep this function as a throwable one so that you can just throw that error. So else part can throw some error at that point. So maybe we can create an error section right now. Let me call that as custom error. It's going to be an enum custom error implementing error. So I'm just going to use custom error with the message. What is the error message that we need to pass? I'm just creating a basic custom error here so that we can just send any kind of error which we receive with some message. So that's the idea here. I'm just gonna throw custom error dot error, pass a message, maybe invalid airports JSON, which is something we are not really printing the actual error, but maybe we are just saying there is something which has gone wrong here. So we are printing that. Otherwise, we can just return the airport's response. Handle pretty well, I guess. Throw this, maybe I can just structure it properly. It's fine. So airport response, once received, it will be sent through this parser. So it is receiving that Alamofire result, getting the data, and if it is parsing, if it does parse well, it returns it. Otherwise, it shows you an invalid JSON error or something. So that's done. Now we can just do a try here. And if it is successful, I'm sending it. If it's a failure, on the catch itself, I can just say error dot error, pass the error which is received. It might be whatever you're throwing from here, custom invalid JSON error. I'm just passing that. So this is pretty simple, straightforward. Airport router, this fetch results, gets you the results, you parse it, send it back. And even here, if there is an error, I can just say error single. This is even before the parse step is happening. If this response itself has some issue, then maybe you can just say fetch failed or something. So custom error dot error airports fetch failed, simple error. So this is done. So single handling, as soon as one result is returned, it returns back that result and then ends that subscription there itself. If there is an error, even then it sends that error back and then ends that subscription. So that's how the single works. it fetches you the airport results. So we already implemented that here. So error handling and all we will take care on in the next episode. Here we just managed to get the request and response. So finally, let's check that once more before concluding this episode. In the next episode, we'll see how we can use this model to actually bind to a table view. Not complete one, but the search results. So these are my results right now. 3885 result values are already packed, which is like each airport's result, which we are not directly going to load to the table view, but we will apply a filter on it and then load that. So I guess this is pretty much fine. This episode, this is what is going to happen. We'll start searching and populating that result here. So hope you like this episode. Come back for the next one, which is having some more interesting stuff where data binding is going to happen to the table view. Filtration will be applied based on whatever you're typing, and then we will start with the other episode where the navigation from one to the other coordinators, more complex ones, are coming up later. So until the next episode, is bye from me.